So my entire family is Cuban. Even my older brother was born in Cuba. I was the first generation American, and my dad was the first one to leave in '85. I want to say he left from Havana to Panama, and then my mom followed with my older brother. My older brother was only like 6 or 7 months, and they met up in Panama. And from there, my mom told me a story, and she even has a picture that I posted on my Instagram. Uh, when she got to Panama, they went to a supermarket and a grocery store, and there's like a whole wall of produce and all vegetables you can imagine, all fruits, everything. And she told me that when she got there, she was so shocked when she walked in that she asked my dad if she was able to touch the fruit and if she was allowed to touch the fruit, because she had never seen a fully stocked grocery store in Cuba. And she didn't know that it was legal to touch the fruit and vegetables and look at it. And so she was so shocked that she took a picture in front of the vegetable produce stand with my brother, just so happy. And she wanted to send that picture to her mom, who was still in Cuba, so that she could see that, hey, there's food here. And I could touch the food and I could buy the food. And this is what awaits us when we leave. And that in and of itself tells you the life that they had in Cuba and how difficult it was. And my mom talks to me all the time about how she didn't have shoes, how she lived in a really, really small apartment with her and her four brothers and her mom and dad. And a lot of times she would go to bed hungry. There was just no there wasn't enough food for them to go around, because unfortunately the dictatorship instilled ration cards, like what's called libretas de abastecimiento, and that was never enough, for a family of seven. And so it was hard. I mean, my grandmother also told me a story about how when Castro first came into power, to somebody in their neighborhood said reported that they were working against the government, and all of a sudden they had two agents knocking, or I don't know how many agents, but several like uniformed officers knocking on their door and ransacking their entire apartment looking for evidence of this counter-revolutionary activity. My grandfather was at work at the time. They went to his job and they arrested him at his job. And then my grandmother was also taken into custody with my two uncles. My mom wasn't born yet. This was in like 61, around there. And they all went off to the police station. My grandfather was held for like 3 days or so, questioned every single one of those days. He says that in one of the questioning, they put a gun to his head, and they were like yelling at him, like, "What did you do? What did you bring? What are you doing?" And it was really traumatic psychologically. Eventually, they released him. My grandmother was released on the first day, but she was in there for like, I don't know how many hours, with one baby and one toddler, and questioned as well. And eventually they were let go. But after that happened to them, that changed them completely. Like they vowed to like try to get their family out of Cuba. Like this wasn't a place where they wanted to live anymore. But unfortunately, it took them a very long time to leave Cuba. Eventually, my grandmother didn't leave Cuba until the early 90s, and my grandfather came after as well. And you know, I am very, very passionate about Cuban issues, because and as I am for any kind of human rights issues, you know, no matter what, there's a dictatorship in Cuba that violates human rights. So I still have family there too. And I have relatives who we help, try to get them what they need, but it's very difficult. It's a struggle for those who are outside of Cuba and still have family on the island, especially with everything that's going on now with the pandemic and everything. It's a very, very difficult situation. No, my mom was the first one on my mom's side to
Okay.
come to the United States. And my mom was able to bring her family over. Most of her brothers came because of my mom, uh, except for two of them. One of them won the visa lottery in Cuba, and another one came on a raft. He was a balsero, and he
Wow.
came in like 90 something. I forget the year. Yes. My uncle, who came on a raft, he had the most difficult journey. And I talk to him every now and then about that journey. He doesn't like to talk about it much. It's still very traumatic. He says that in the middle of the night in the ocean, he would hear people screaming, and and to him, and it's very likely that it was maybe a boat that was coming apart, because these were makeshift rafts that they just gathered random materials to put together. And he remembers hearing those screams in the middle of the night, and you can't do anything because you don't know where they are. You just hear the sounds, and it's pitch black. It's in the middle of the night. um so it was very difficult for them, and also for him to leave in that way, because at the time he was married and had two small kids. But you can imagine the desperation that he must have felt for him to make that decision to leave his family for the hope of getting to a free country to then help them from there. And for you to throw yourself in the ocean with a makeshift raft, you have to really be desperate. I don't know how many days he was out in open water, but he was rescued by the Coast Guard, the US Coast Guard. And him and the five other men, it was six men in total, including my uncle, were picked up by the Coast Guard and taken to Guantanamo Bay, where they spent a year in I guess you could call it a refugee camp there, where they picked up thousands of balseros and housed them there at Guantanamo Bay in camps until they were able to process them and bring them over to the United States. And I remember when we found out that my uncle had taken to the sea and joined the other balseros. And I remember my grandmother praying the rosary and praying just for her son's safety and for all the other men that he was with. And I also remember going with my mom and my grandmother to a building somewhere in Miami where they had really long lists of names. And if you found your relative's name on that list, that means that they were in Guantanamo and that they had arrived safely and that they were good. And we went there so many times and we couldn't find his name, and it was such an anguish. And we would leave like all defeated because we didn't find his name. And then finally, we learned that he was safe and in Guantanamo.